September 22nd, 1941. Rue des Batignolles, Paris, occupied France. The rhythmic clack-clack-clack of jackboots echoes off the Haussmann facades. A sound so common, it has become the hated, ambient heartbeat of the city. 16-year-old Marcel Pagnon doesn't flinch, but his grip tightens on the cheap canvas school bag slung over his shoulder. He isn't carrying textbooks. Inside, nestled amongst sheaves of fake geometry notes, is a bundle of leaflets, a new issue of the clandestine newspaper, Défense de la France. Marcel leans against the cold stone of a bakery, trying to look bored, his eyes fixed on the heavy gray Mercedes-Benz 170V sedan that is just parked beside the Kommandantur building. Two Wehrmacht officers, their collars starched and their movements crisp, emerge. They speak in clipped, guttural German, oblivious to the skinny boy observing them. Marcel's heart hammers against his ribs, not from fear yet, but from a surge of defiant adrenaline. He can smell the heavy, acrid exhaust of the idling German staff car, a scent he now associates with occupation and oppression. His job is simple, terrifying, and vital. Plaster the leaflets on key government buildings and slip them into the post boxes of known collaborators. If the Gestapo catches him, the best-case scenario is a labor camp. The worst, a firing squad in the fortress of Mont Valérien. Just 2 weeks ago, Marcel watched from a hidden alley as a man, a university student only a few years older than himself, was brutally beaten with rifle butts for carrying a small radio receiver. The image of the man's slumped, bloody form is etched permanently into his mind. Now, a small window of opportunity. The officers are preoccupied with their maps and orders. Marcel pushes off the wall. He crosses the street with an unnerving calm, his pace identical to that of an ordinary schoolboy running an errand. Reaching a tall wooden telephone pole near the German car, he fumbles in his bag, not for the paper, but for a small tin of sticky, homemade glue, a mixture of flour and water provided by his contact, a chemistry student named Colette. With a speed born of practice, Marcel slaps a thin layer of glue onto the pole. The crisp leaflet. Frenchmen, do not despair. The tide turns, is pressed against the wood. It's barely a 2-second operation. He doesn't wait for it to stick properly. The mere act of public defiance is enough. He continues his walk, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, trying to regulate his breathing. Behind him, the German officers laugh at some private joke. They haven't even glanced his way. The small act, a flicker of resistance in the vast darkness of occupation, is done. He turns the corner and melts into the crowds, already planning the next delivery. This is how the Réseau du Musée de l'Homme, the earliest, most intellectual resistance network, is kept alive. By the invisible actions of its youngest, most disposable members, Marcel, and hundreds like him, are the capillaries feeding the heart of the fight. Section 1. The leaflets and the line of defiance. The capillaries feeding the heart of the fight demanded more than just pamphlets as the occupation dragged into 1942. The Allied losses in the North Atlantic, the brutalizing rafle du Vel d'Hiv deportations, and the incessant, grinding demands of the Service du Travail Obligatoire, STO, the forced labor draft, radicalized a new stratum of the population, teenagers who saw their futures being stripped away, brick by brick, for the benefit of the Third Reich. These were the children of the lost generation, too young to have fought in 1940, but old enough to hate the conqueror. In Lyon, the very epicenter of the resistance in the so-called Free Zone before its complete occupation in November 1942, the move from propaganda to direct action was spearheaded by networks like the Mouvements Unis de la Résistance, MUR. Here, 17-year-old Jean-Pierre Lévesque was not just a courier, but a saboteur. Jean-Pierre lived near the sprawling Parc de la Tête d'Or, an innocent facade for a much darker reality. The nearby strategic railway marshalling yard, a vital artery for moving German troops, materiel, and, more chillingly, prisoners south and east. Jean-Pierre and his cell, composed entirely of high school and vocational college students, were given their first serious mission by their contact, a man known only as Colonel Henri. It was not a grand bombing, but a surgical act of disruption. Their target? The main electric switching gear controlling a crucial section of the rail line leading toward Italy. October 5th, 1942, 11:45 p.m. A thin, cold drizzle slicks the rails, reflecting the moonlight in broken, oily silver strips. Jean-Pierre, crouched low in the shadow of a goods wagon stenciled with the Deutsche Reichsbahn eagle, felt the cold mud seeping through his thin trousers. He carried a small rucksack containing only 2 items, a heavy pair of insulated wire cutters and a canister of fine-grade iron filings mixed with a proprietary, slow-drying adhesive, a recipe perfected by their industrial chemistry student mentor. The air thrummed with the distant, steady chuff-chuff-chuff of a steam locomotive shunting carriages. The sound was a double-edged sword. It provided cover for their movements, but also meant the yard was very much alive. A single weak bulb cast a pool of yellow light over the gray control box, their objective, guarded by nothing more than a rusted padlock and a thick-gauge chain. Jean-Pierre's partner, Etienne, a burly student of metallurgy, produced a simple pin from his coat lapel and worked the lock with astonishing speed, a skill learned not from the resistance, but from petty childhood mischief. The padlock clicked open. Jean-Pierre took over. His fingers, numb with cold, carefully lifted the heavy metal cover. Inside, a spider web of wiring connected to massive ceramic insulators. He didn't need to cut anything. The task was infiltration. The iron filings, when introduced into the sensitive electrical contacts and relays, would not cause an immediate, catastrophic short. Instead, they would slowly, invisibly degrade the system, creating intermittent, impossible-to-diagnose faults, misread signals, unexpected line breaks, and ultimately, total operational failure over the next 48 hours. Jean-Pierre opened the tin. He held his breath, mindful of the drizzle, and with a delicate, steady hand, he sprinkled the metallic dust over the crucial contact points, making sure the adhesive would bind the disruptive particles where they would cause maximum chaos. A small, almost insignificant puff of static dust hung in the damp air. The fate of vital troop transports now rested on a handful of stolen iron filings and the steady nerves of a 17-year-old boy. He closed the box, replaced the lock, and melted back into the shadows. They had just thrown a handful of sand into the gears of the German war machine. Section 2. Iron filings in the gears. The sand in the gears was effective. The next morning, the Lyon to Grenoble line experienced a 4-hour delay due to what the Feld Gendarmerie investigators would dismiss as unspecified electrical failure. But acts of sabotage, no matter how small or cleverly disguised, always led to reprisals. The German authorities, specifically the increasingly powerful Sicherheitsdienst, SD, knew they were facing an organized, though decentralized, threat. And they knew the hands carrying out the dirty work were often those of children, who were perceived as less disciplined and easier to break. The stakes were raised considerably with the implementation of the Planvert, Green Plan, the railway sabotage campaign, mandated by General de Gaulle's exiled government in London. Now, the teenagers of the resistance were tasked not with subtle disruption, but with overt, destructive acts designed to cripple the logistics, empowering the German garrisons. In the industrial suburbs near Limoges, 17-year-old Jacqueline Jacot Fourcade had moved beyond distributing pamphlets and was now a key member of the Corps Francs, the paramilitary arm of the AS, Armée Secrète. Jacot was renowned for her nerve and her knowledge of the surrounding forests and railway maintenance routes, a knowledge gleaned from years of hiking and birdwatching, now turned into tactical intelligence. January 14th, 1943, 2 o'clock a.m. A wooded embankment outside Saint-Sulpice-Laurière. The air was bitterly cold, the kind that bites deep into the lungs. Jacot lay flat on her belly in the damp undergrowth beside the main line connecting Bordeaux to Limoges. Beside her, an older veteran of the 1940 campaign, Gaston, meticulously primed 2 Bickford fuses connected to satchels containing several pounds of powerful plastique explosive, stolen from a German munitions dump by a collaborating French worker. Their target was a section of track running over a deep culvert, a perfect spot to ensure maximum disruption and difficulty of repair. The plan was audacious. A freight train carrying fuel and munitions was scheduled to pass at 02:30. "Jacot," Gaston whispered, his voice raspy. "The patrol. Tell me when they pass the kilometer marker." Jacot, armed with a pair of cheap field binoculars, scanned the track in the faint moonlight. A small Wehrmacht patrol, 3 men with Karabiner 98K rifles, walked the line every hour. She saw them now, small shapes moving with mechanical regularity. 3 minutes to the marker, Gaston," she murmured back, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. She felt a profound sense of isolation, a disconnection from the normalcy of her former life. She should be worrying about her baccalaureate exam, not the precise moment to signal the detonation of military-grade explosives. The patrol passed, their shadows stretching long and distorted in the moonlight. Gaston positioned the charges, carefully placing one on the outside of the rail and one beneath the wooden tie, maximizing the severance of the steel. "Clear," Gaston confirmed, sliding back into the bushes. Minutes later, a distant, heavy rumble vibrated through the earth. The rhythm grew, becoming a monstrous clatter-thump-clatter, the sound of a fully loaded freight train approaching its speed. The earth began to shake. Jacot held the wire taut in her hand. Her instruction: hold the circuit until the engine's boiler, the vulnerable core of the locomotive, was directly over the charge. Waiting was agony. The locomotive, a colossal Kriegs locomotive DRG Class 52, thundered into view, its single glaring headlight cutting a swathe through the darkness. The wind from its passage hit them like a physical blow. Now. Jacot's fingers squeezed the contact. The sound was not just a bang. It was an ear-splitting, tearing roar. A white-hot flash momentarily blinded them. Metal shrieked. The front axle of the Class 52, severed from the rail, buckled immediately. The great engine listed, then plowed off the track, the sound of tearing metal and escaping steam, a hideous, sustained screech. The following fuel wagons concertinaed into the derailed engine, erupting in a violent fireball that lit up the entire forest. The smell of burning diesel and pulverized earth choked the air. Jacot, deafened and exhilarated, watched the flames rise toward the cold night sky. The plan vert was executed. The consequences, she knew, would be terrible. But at that moment, she was not a child. She was a soldier who had struck a crippling blow. Section 3. Sabotage and the Iron Hand of the SD. The sight of the burning train, a catastrophic pile of wreckage, was a victory of the spirit, but the resulting counterblow by the German authorities was swift and merciless. Every derailment, every burned telephone wire, every act of defiance was met with a brutal arithmetic. 10, 20, sometimes 50 French lives for one German or one act of material damage. The Sicherheitsdienst, SD, and its enforcement arm, the Gestapo, intensified their hunt. And they used their most effective weapons: informers, infiltration, and the psychological tool of terror. They were particularly keen on breaking the younger cells, believing that the resolve of children would crumble faster under extreme pressure. In the spring of 1943, the net began to close around the teenage saboteurs of the Lyon region, including Jean-Pierre Lévesque. Their initial successes, the invisible sabotage of the rail switches, had made them complacent. An ambitious, brutal SS Hauptsturmführer named Klaus Barbie, later known as the Butcher of Lyon, had taken over the SD headquarters in the city, and he ran his counterinsurgency with cold, bureaucratic efficiency. March 29, 1943. 7:15 a.m. A café near the Place Bellecour, Lyon. The air in the small café was thick with the smell of stale Gauloises and lukewarm ersatz coffee. Jean-Pierre was waiting for a rendezvous. His contact, Colonel Henri, was supposed to deliver a new radio crystal and a list of targets for the coming weeks. Jean-Pierre sat at a small wobbly table, pretending to read a 2-day-old issue of the collaborationist paper Gringoire. The back page opened to the sports scores. A man in a worn tweed coat entered. Jean-Pierre recognized him immediately as Henri. But something was wrong. Henri's face was ashen, his movements jerky, and his eyes carried a terrified glaze. He slid into the seat opposite Jean-Pierre without a word, his hands trembling. "The network is blown," Henri managed, his voice a dry whisper. "The printer in Villeurbanne. They took him last night. They know about the rail sabotage. They have names, Jean-Pierre. You have to run. Now." The warning came too late. Before Jean-Pierre could even react, the café door burst open, slamming against the wall. 4 men in long leather coats and soft-brimmed fedoras, the unmistakable, terrifying uniform of the Gestapo, flooded the space. They were fast, quiet, and absolutely lethal. "Hände hoch!" one of them barked, his Luger P08 pistol leveled directly at Henri's chest. Henri, his eyes wide with a combination of fear and defeat, slowly raised his hands. Jean-Pierre, sitting on the bench side of the table, saw his opportunity. His instinct, honed by months of operating under constant threat, took over. He grabbed the heavy cast-iron table and violently shoved it into the legs of the Gestapo agent nearest him. The agent staggered, dropping his pistol. Jean-Pierre vaulted over the table, knocking over a ceramic coffee pot and shattering a window pane in his mad scramble for the back exit. He heard the muffled crack of a silenced pistol behind him, a sound that signaled Henri's immediate execution. He burst into the narrow, refuse-strewn alleyway behind the café, the metallic smell of blood and coffee thick in his nostrils. He was running blind, his lungs burning, the heavy, deliberate pounding of the pursuing jackboots echoing down the close walls of the Traboulet, Lyon's famous hidden passageways. He was no longer a saboteur or a student. He was prey. He scrambled into a dark, urine-smelling traboule, hoping the labyrinthine alleys would confuse his pursuers. He was fast, but they were relentless. He could hear them shouting in guttural German, closing the distance. He had to disappear, not just for his own life, but to protect the handful of names still uncompromised in his head. Section 4. The Rat Hunt in the Traboule. The pursuit through Lyon's ancient Traboule, the secret, covered passageways connecting buildings and streets, was a desperate race against time and terror. These serpentine, wet corridors, built for silk workers in centuries past, were now the hunting grounds of the Gestapo. Jean-Pierre Lévesque scrambled up a narrow flight of slick stone steps, his leather shoes slipping precariously. The muffled shouts of his pursuers were getting closer, the acoustic effect of the close walls making it impossible to tell precisely how near they were. He burst out onto a small, sunlit courtyard, a temporary moment of blindness before he plunged into another, darker passage. He knew the geography of this city better than any German could, having played hide-and-seek here since childhood. His immediate objective was the Montée du Gourguillon, a steep, winding street leading up to the Roman ruins, a chaotic mix of civilian life where he might blend in. As he ran, his mind raced, not about his fate, but about the failure to retrieve the list of names. He had memorized several key members, including Colette, the chemistry student, and the German agents knew this. His knowledge made him a target far more valuable than the executed Colonel Henri. He reached a heavy, nail-studded wooden door leading onto the Rue Saint-Georges. He threw his weight against it. It yielded, and he stumbled out onto the main street, immediately adjusting his pace to a hurried walk, trying to assume the anonymous posture of a citizen late for work. The transition from the darkness of the Traboules to the bright, open street felt jarring, like stepping onto a stage. He walked past a German soldier directing traffic, who glanced at him with a bored, indifferent stare. Freedom seemed impossibly close. He could almost smell the fresh air outside the immediate cordon. Then, he heard a sharp whistle. Not the German traffic whistle, but a long, specific trill used by the Gestapo in the hunt. He froze. A black Citroën traction Avant, the vehicle of choice for the SD, screeched around the corner. Two men in fedoras were leaning out of the windows, scanning the crowds. Jean-Pierre tried to duck into a doorway, but a fourth man, who must have been posted as a flanker, stepped out directly in front of him. "Halt! Stehen bleiben!" the agent commanded, his hand darting to his pocket. Jean-Pierre didn't hesitate. He swung his school bag, the same bag that had carried the iron filings, like a desperate weapon, striking the agent across the face. The man stumbled, momentarily stunned. It was enough. Jean-Pierre sprinted back toward the Traboul entrance, his only refuge. He heard a harsh, double crack, the sound of the Luger firing. A sharp, burning pain ripped through his calf. He didn't scream. He didn't stop. He dragged his now useless left leg over the threshold and fell down the first flight of stone stairs, landing in a heap in Hatzning, the dank darkness. He lay there, panting, the warmth of his own blood blooming on the cold stone. The Gestapo agents were now swarming the entrance, shouting in their harsh, relentless German. He could hear their footsteps echoing, slow and deliberate, on the stairs. They knew he was wounded. They knew he was trapped. But he was in the darkness now, and he had the bloodied advantage of an intimate knowledge of his surroundings. He pulled himself into a small recess beneath the stairs, the pain in his leg a searing, relentless fire. He had to buy time. He had to survive long enough to warn Colette. Section 5. The Price of Silence. The darkness of the stairwell recess became a crucible of pain and silent determination. Jean-Pierre pressed his forehead against the damp stone, trying to steady the wild pounding of his heart. The bleeding from his calf was heavy, but the fabric of his trousers absorbed most of the sound. He could hear the Gestapo agents, two of them, descending the stone steps now, their heavy boots scraping the ancient rock, their flashlights cutting hesitant, blinding beams through the gloom. "Verflucht! He is here. I saw him fall," one voice hissed in German. "He is a child, Hans. He cannot go far with a hole in his leg," the second replied, sounding impatient. They moved past his hiding place. He could feel the vibration of their heavy steps in the stone, and the beam of a flashlight sliced across the exact spot where he lay, missing him by mere inches. The metallic scent of their wool uniforms and stale tobacco was overpowering. They went deeper into the traboules, searching for a side passage or a further descent. This was his chance. He bit down hard on the sleeve of his own coat and began to crawl, dragging his inert leg behind him, back toward the main street exit. Every movement sent a spike of agonizing pain through him. He was losing blood quickly, and the cold of the stone was beginning to penetrate his core. He finally reached the door and, using a loose cobblestone, he managed to jam the heavy wooden latch. It was a futile gesture, but it would buy him perhaps 30 seconds. He knew the Gestapo would soon realize their mistake and return. His focus narrowed to one thing, a small baker's shop, La Fleurie, 3 blocks away. Its owner, Madame Dubois, was a known resistance sympathizer who had sheltered downed RAF airmen. He staggered out onto the street again, leaning heavily against the wall, trying to control the terrible, ragged quality of his breathing. The street, which had been his salvation, was now an executioner. He had hobbled less than 50 meters when a third Gestapo agent, emerging from the black Citroën, spotted him, his blood trail a dark, undeniable signature on the pavement. "Da ist er!" the agent roared, drawing his pistol. There was no more escape. Jean-Pierre turned, his back to the wall, his face pale and drawn. He didn't raise his hands. He simply stared at the man, a look of pure, defiant hatred burning in his eyes. The agent hesitated for a fraction of a second, unsettled by the boy's refusal to show fear. Then, the 2 other agents burst out of the traboule entrance, shouting. They didn't shoot him. They wanted information. The heavy, precise blow of a rifle butt connected with the side of his head, and the world dissolved into a ringing, suffocating blackness. The consequences Jacques had feared, the terror of the SD's iron hand, had just claimed one of the young architects of the resistance. Jean-Pierre Lévesque was dragged unconscious into the back of the black sedan, his fate sealed by the information the Gestapo would attempt to torture out of him in the cellars of the École de Santé Militaire, Klaus Barbie's headquarters. The price of silence had just become infinite. Section 6. Legacy in the Darkness. The loss of Jean-Pierre Lévesque sent a wave of cold reality through the remaining youth cells in Lyon. The Gestapo, under Barbie's command, employed systematic torture methods, and resistance members were under no illusion about the information that would eventually be extracted. The network had to go dormant, change all codes, and assume all uncaptured members were compromised. The teenage resistance learned a brutal lesson. Individual bravery meant little against the Gestapo's institutionalized sadism. Yet, for every cell that was broken, 2 more emerged. The STO, which demanded all young French men born between 1920 and 1922 report for forced labor in Germany, proved to be the single most powerful recruitment tool for the resistance. Thousands of teenagers fled to the mountains and forests, swelling the ranks of the Maquis, the rural, armed resistance groups. In the rugged, forested terrain of the Massif Central, Jacqueline Jacquot-Fourcade, the rail saboteur from Limoges, had fully transitioned to the Maquis. Her work was no longer quick, surgical sabotage, but the sustained, brutal existence of guerrilla warfare. She had adopted the life of a soldier, carrying a captured German MP-40 submachine gun and operating in a unit that lived entirely off the land and local supply lines. May 11th, 1944. A clearing in the Forêt de Chabrière. Jacquot, now 18, stood guard over a freshly dug cache of weaponry. Bren light machine guns and Sten guns parachuted in by the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, the night before. The air was tense with anticipation. D-Day was an open secret among the high-ranking resistance leadership, and the Maquis units were being readied for the signal to rise and paralyze the German response. Her unit, Maquis du Loup, Wolves Maquis, received an urgent signal via a wireless operator. A major German convoy, trucks carrying the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, was moving north toward Normandy, a crucial part of the reinforcement effort against the expected Allied invasion. This division, notorious for its brutality on the Eastern Front, had to be slowed at all costs. Their objective was a winding mountain road near the town of Oradour-sur-Ver, where the convoy would be funneled into a single file. Jacot and her team were tasked with laying a crude but effective ambush. Their tools: 3 powerful anti-tank mines, more stolen plastique, and the devastating firepower of the newly acquired British weapons. Jacot worked alongside 2 male maquisards to position the heavy, disc-shaped mines. The knowledge gained from her childhood hiking served her well as she identified the perfect, muddy shoulder of the road to conceal the charges. The work was exhausting, the tension unbearable. Every sound was scrutinized: the chirp of a bird, the snap of a twig. At 11:30 a.m., the first low roar of powerful diesel engines reached them, a deep, menacing sound that vibrated through the forest floor. The maquisards took up their positions, concealed in dense scrub above the road. "Wait for the trucks, not the scouts," the unit leader, a former schoolteacher, whispered. "We need maximum damage." The leading vehicles, 2 motorcycles and an armored car, passed without incident. Then came the bulk of the convoy: open-top Opel Blitz trucks crammed with heavily armed SS troopers, their faces grim and dust-covered. The lead truck, loaded with munitions, hit the first mine. The resulting explosion was cataclysmic, a massive fireball that obliterated the truck and left a crater in the road, showering the convoy with burning wreckage. Before the stunned SS soldiers could react, the maquisards opened fire with their machine guns, Jacot's MP-40 adding its rapid, flat rat-tat-tat to the cacophony. The ambush was short, savage, and effective. The road was blocked, a vital fuel truck was burning fiercely, and the legendary Das Reich division was halted, confused, and suffering casualties. Jacot's hands were shaking from the recoil of the submachine gun, her ears ringing. But her aim had been true. This was the legacy forged in the darkness of occupation, the transformation of innocent children into hardened, effective soldiers who delivered the first vital, crippling blow to the German forces before the Allies even landed.